Okay, hi everyone. My name's Penny Coventry, and I'm a 9-year awarded Microsoft MVP. I've written a number of books, in excess of 10 now. So I'm an independent consultant, and I also do some training for combined knowledge and do some product specialist work for Lightning Tools. So if you pay me, I'll come and do some work for you too. This session is talking about visualizing data. Now, in many times I go to customer sites and they say, right, okay, SharePoint's very tabular. All the data in my lists and libraries is very much in a tables-like format, in a list-type format. And of course, it's okay once you get used to it, but some people will not be used to it. And they will want flashy diagrams, they'll want it highlighted if somebody, a salesman isn't meeting his target, and so on. Okay. Now, of course, I've done a lot of work with SharePoint Designer, so of course, in SharePoint 2010, I would have cranked open SharePoint Designer, created a data view web part, and done some conditional formatting. But we haven't got that display tab. But also, you don't want everybody in your organisation having to rank up with quite a complicated tool, okay, even if you're on SharePoint 2010. So the idea of this session is to say, what can you do out of the box as an end user and not get yourself into trouble too much? I'm talking about both on-premises as well as in Office 365. And also, I mean, you go to many other different sessions this week and they'll talk about Power BI and they'll talk about you needing E3 and E4 to be able to do some of the visualizations. And again, some of those tools are quite complicated. So I wanted to sort of step back and say, what can you do if you haven't got an E3 or E4? What can you do if you haven't bought Power BI? What can you do if you've only got the standard edition of SharePoint server? Okay, so that's the premise that I'm going to start with. I'm also then going to say, okay, what happens if you have got E3 and E4? What happens if you have got the Enterprise Edition? What can I do without expecting my IT pros to install reporting services, without having to buy Power BI? Okay, so I'm going to try to show you some simple and effective ways of visualizing data. Okay, and many of these little techniques you will perhaps have seen before. Okay, but hopefully I will show you something that you may not have seen before. Okay, so I'm going to be concentrating on Visio and Excel. Okay, because they are two very good Office applications, client applications, that many people already know how to use. Excel is often installed on a person's desktop, okay? And they may have used it very many times before and may already have that skills to create pivot tables and pivot charts. Okay? So I'm going to show you how we can expose those pivot tables and pivot charts within our SharePoint sites. Okay? I'm also going to show you Visio. Now, okay, yes, I know Visio is an additional extra. Okay, so yes, the person who creates the Visio diagrams will need Visio on their desktop. Okay. But once we've put it into SharePoint, as long as you install Visio Viewer onto the other user's desktop, which doesn't cost you anything, they'll be able to see the Visio diagrams that the person who has got the full-blown Visio client has created. So that's my sort of premise. So yes, I'm going to start off saying, right, what happens if you haven't got the Enterprise Edition? What can we do to expose the contents within our files, whether it's Word, whether it's Visio, whether it's Excel? And then, yes, if we have got the Enterprise Edition and your IT Pro has installed Excel services and Visio services, which is not too daunting for them, then what can we do extra from that? So that's what the premise is about. So without buying any BI add-ons, we're going to try and visualize our data Now, when I'm talking about visualization, I'm not always talking about a map or a pie chart or whatever. I am talking about things like conditional formatting, okay, which, as I say, we've lost really in SharePoint 2013. Now, of course, if you go to Todd Bleeker's session or some of the other people's session, they will say, right, there's a new way of doing conditional formatting, right? If you use JS Link, right, then you can do some conditional formatting of your web parts, of your lists and libraries. So you're getting back the capability from your data view web parts. And they'll try to say, yes, it's only a little bit of developer code, and if you have a look at it, you could just tweak it and you can do whatever you like. But again, you may not be happy with that solution. So I'm going to try to keep you out of code. I'm also going to talk about web part connections, because again, that allows you to build some lovely dashboards, interactive dashboards. Many people don't know about web part connections, so I'm going to show you that as well. I'm not going to be talking about Access web apps, that was in my previous session. I will be talking about how we can get data from external data sources, so that we can use them within Excel and Visio to create some nice shapes and so on. I'm not going to show you how to use Visio. I'm not going to show you how to use Excel. I'm saying, right, if you've got some skills in your company that have created these, then this is how we can expose it in SharePoint. Okay. So I've got several examples of Visio files and Excel files that I'll be using during my configuration. So the first thing you've got to do, right, is say, where is the data? Now, of course, if we're talking about data within your organisations, you're going to have loads and loads of different silos of data. And you're going to have to work out what data you want to visualise. So you're going to have to find out where it is. Is it in an Excel spreadsheet? Is it in a Word document? Is it in a PDF file? Okay. And the best thing to do is we do want to expose that data on our web pages. We don't want somebody to click on the file, to download it, to then open it up. Okay. We want them to go to a web page and see that data immediately. We don't want to hide data. Even if it's in a file. Okay. So we need to work out where this data is. Yes, it could be in external data. And again, we don't want somebody to have to open up another application. We want them to go to the page to actually see that data. So wherever it is, you've got to work out that data. Then you've got to go and find somebody who knows about Excel or Visio so that you can actually visualize it. Now, it could be within InfoPath forms. Okay, as well. Now, of course, the previous session was all about building a solution using InfoPath forms. Now, many of the data within InfoPath forms you can actually promote up into columns within your library, into your forms library. So again, that would show on your page. But there's certain pieces of data that you can't promote up. So if you've got a repeating table, all right, then you can only promote up perhaps the first column in the first line, or the count of columns in your repeating table, or whatever. So promotion with that type of data in your InfoPath is not very good. But hopefully I will also show you, if I can get round to it, how you can display that data without having to promote that particular data into a column, because you can't do it in a column. You could perhaps concatenate it, okay, and then save it in a column, but that's quite a lot of work. And the external data could nowadays be something in Azure. Okay. So what I'm going to do is show you some data I've connected up to that's been externally created. I created it for my previous session on Access Web Apps, and Access Web Apps actually creates a database, and if you're using Office 365, it will create it in an Azure SQL server. Okay. And so I'm going to show you how I can amend the data which is being saved externally, and yet I can display it within an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so that would be my example of getting hold of data that's external in an SQL data server. It could be an on-premises SQL server, but it could also be an Azure SQL server. So I will be showing you that, and also showing you how to directly access a SQL database. So the next thing to do is to work out on which site you're going to create your pages. So which are the people who need to visualize your data? Now, of course, there's loads of third parties that help you aggregate your information from one site to another, or from one site collection to another. But again, we're trying to do the premise here that you don't want to spend any money. Okay, so that's why I'm not talking about any third parties. So yes, when we're connecting up to the external data, like I was talking about the Azure SQL database, you've got to actually say where that Azure database is. All right. If it's internal, where is it internally to your organization? Which database on that database server you want to connect to, what table, what query, what view do you want to connect up to, and you also need to give some authentication. Okay. Now, in many cases, the best way to do this is using BCS. Again, you don't have to pay for it. You get it free. You get it free in SharePoint Foundation. You get it free in the Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, and in most of the Office 365 plans. So again, that allows us to define where our external data is. And you can use SharePoint Designer to create an external content type if it's an SQL database. Okay, so it's lovely and easy to do that. So once you've decided where your external system is, then you will have to embed the connection string sometimes within the actual file. Now, of course, if you're using BCS, you don't have to embed the connection string. You just refer to the external content type. And everything works well. In external list, you create an external list of your external content type, and then you treat it as any other ordinary SharePoint list and just say I want to connect up to it. If you're not using BCS, then you are going to create a data connection string. Now, in many of these programs, it will do that for you, but you still need to know the server name, the database name, and how you're going to authenticate. Now, you can save your authentication, your user ID and password within the files, but we're talking about not only, it's somebody's birthday, we're talking about not only you doing it in your own file, saved on your own, perhaps your My Site document library that you're not sharing with anybody else, so it's not a security risk. But if we are going to expose these files or the data from these files to everybody else, then we really shouldn't be saving our usernames and our passwords embedded within the data connection string. Again, what Microsoft does, SharePoint does, excuse me, they provide you, again, free of charge, something called Secure Store. You don't get it on SharePoint Foundation. You have to have SharePoint Server. So in the Secure Store, you can actually create something called a target application ID, and you will then save in that target application ID the username and password, and then within Excel or whatever, you will say, I'm not storing the username or password. Go to the Secure Store and use this target application ID. Okay. Therefore, people can't see the username and password. Okay. And only a SharePoint administrator can actually change the username and password. But if you do it that way, and perhaps there has been a security breach, then the SharePoint Central Administrator can change the password within the target application ID, and then all the applications that are using that target ID get the updated password. if you embed your password within the file, then you are going to need to be informed if people reset that password that you can get access to that data from external. So you're building a rod for your back. Okay. So using a secure store is the much better way. Okay, so yes, we want to create a Visio diagram. How many people have been play around with Visio? Okay, right, okay. So you're all set then. And the wonderful thing about Visio is when you save it into a document library, you've got all the advantages that a document library brings you. You can check it in, check it out, or whatever. And therefore, you've got quite good control of who's going to alter the diagram. Okay. You can do, you know, major version, minor versions. You could also automate a workflow around it because it's being saved within SharePoint. You can create alerts and so on. Okay. But because we're now saving it within SharePoint, we can have no problems about security around the file. Okay. And we can use that file because it's shared within web parts to display the contents of that. And as I say, it gets integrated with BCS. Now, Visio Services, as I say, is an enterprise edition. You need enterprise SharePoint server. Now, okay, your IT pro may have done everything that they need to create the Visio Services service application. However, if you haven't enabled the SharePoint Server Enterprise Site Collection feature, right, you won't still be able to use the Visio Web Access web part to display the contents of your Visio diagram. Okay. So you will get this little error come up, right, when you try to display a Visio diagram within the Visio Web Access or web part. So all you need to do is enable those two features. Okay. So one of them at the top of the site collection and then one at the site, and then you can use the Visio Web Access web part. Okay. Now, Visio Services 2010, there's been improvements in SharePoint 2013. Who's still on SharePoint 2010? Okay. Well, in 2010, you used to have two different types of files. You used to have a VSD file, and you used to have a VDW file, a Visio Drawing Web Format. Okay? And you had to publish the Visio diagram, the VDW file, up to SharePoint, right, for you to be able to display the contents of that diagram within a web part. Okay? And the web part at that time was using Silverlight. Okay? What's happened in Visio Services 2013 is Visio's been brought up to date. All the other Office files, they've all had XML format since, I don't know, 2007, or was it a bit before that? You know, they used to do those famous demos that they used to go in and chop half the file off and it would still render. Okay, so underneath the covers, Word, Excel, PowerPoint have all got the X on as part of their extension. So they're all XML files. So in 2013, Visio was brought up to date, 6 years or maybe 10 years after all the other products. So it is now an XML file. It's not a fully, I've forgotten what the name is of the format of the file, but it's not fully compatible with that. But it does mean that we can now do a lot more for it. And they've got the ability now that you don't have to publish your file up to SharePoint for you to display it within the Visio Web Access or web part. All you need to do is upload it into a document library and then point the web part to the file in the document library. Okay. So nothing special. You don't have to remind yourself, oh, I need to do this to actually see it within SharePoint. Also, Silverlight is not the default way of rendering the Visio diagram now. It's actually a full fidelity ping. Okay. which means that you can zoom in and you can still see quite a lot of the format of the diagram. So that's the improvement there. So, okay. So, the person who's got Visio, what do they need to do? They are the solution creators. Sometimes they're called other names. Okay. So they need to sit down, they need to work out where the data is, they need to say, right, where am I? Am I using on-premises or am I using Office 365? Because there's some restrictions about getting data from external data sources if you're in Office 365. You can get it from a lot more data sources if you're on-premises. So they need to understand that. Okay. If you can't actually import it when it's displayed on your web page from a particular data source, then what you may need to do is import it into your Visio file and then draw your diagrams and then remind yourself to update the data every now and then, which is a bit of a bind. Okay. So yes, we can data, once we've got the data, whether it's from an external data source or from embedded data within the file, we can then draw our diagrams, and then we can link our shapes, our diagram shapes, with the data. So as the data changes, the shapes can change. So you can have a red background shape if a value is below a certain amount on a particular line. So you could like mimic System Center. So you could have a Visio diagram that shows all the servers in a particular rack, and then when you've imported the data, perhaps on a timer, you could import it or refresh it, and it would turn a particular server green if it had previously been offline. Or if it's reporting that a particular disk is down, perhaps you would colour it blue or something. Okay? Yes, the other important thing is to link your data with your shapes and then configure your shapes with conditions so that they're visually showing the effect of your data. They would then save it as a VSDX file, because that's the default for SharePoint for Visio 2013. And then you would then upload it into SharePoint. They would then create the pages that would display the content. Okay? And we'll look at different ways of displaying that data. Users come along to those pages, they can interact with the pages, and then different things will happen on those pages. So you've got to have a good solution creator to make your users happy. As I say, the important thing is to link your data with the shapes and configure your shapes to do the things that you want it to. And again, Visio is very easy to do this. It does take a little bit of learning, okay? There's loads of webcasts and information on the site if you've not done this before, okay? And on my blog post, because I have done previous Visio talks, I did one at SharePoint Saturday, I think it was 2 years ago. If you've come to previous evolutions, and you've got the DVDs from previous conferences, then look for webcasts by David Mann or by Jennifer Mason. That will again get you started with Visio. So as I said, when you know about your data, your solution creators do need to realize that there's a difference between an on-premise solution and an Office 365. So on-premise, you can get the information from many, many different places. Okay, so the wizard will automatically lead you through if you're any of these standard ones, SQL, Excel, so you can get data from an Excel spreadsheet that is being displayed by Excel services. So you can get that. You can get it from a SharePoint list. You can use OLADB to connect up to many different formats of databases. And then you can also create your custom own ones. Okay. And when we're talking about SharePoint lists, as I say, it could be an external list, which again could point to many different data sources. However, if you're on Office 365, you're really limited to using Excel services, right, data through that, if we're not talking about embedded data, or a SharePoint list. And in that case, if the data is not in one of those two, you've really got to use BCS, okay, to actually do it in that sort of manner. As I said, always think about your security, not only securing your files, but also about the user ID and the password. There is a web part that allows you to zoom in and select different things, and it can also have a hyperlink behavior within the Visio diagram. So when you create your Visio diagram, you can have many different pages. And within your Visio diagram, you can, when somebody clicks on a shape, you can make that person see the next page. And then when they click on an object in the second page, you can make them go to the third page. So within the Visio diagram, you can have that same behavior. Okay. Now, of course, if the thing that you actually want to affect is not within the single Visio diagram, so perhaps when you click on a Visio shape, you want the data from an Excel spreadsheet to change, then you could use web part connections, but in many cases, what you will need to do is use some JavaScript. So you will need sometimes a developer to to help you create some of the JavaScript. Again, like I was telling you about the people who talk to you about the JS link, and they say you look at it and you'd ignore all that and you just tweak these two lines, it's the same in Visio. Once your developer has developed most of it, and then again most of it is on the web, then they only have to change a small portion. Okay? And so it's well within many people's realms. Okay? Now, just like anything, you've got to think about performance. You don't want to put too many images on the page. Because the rendering capability is different. In a minute, I'm going to show you how to render a PDF file, for example. And there's so you can see the contents of your PDF file on a page, so people don't have to download it. They can actually interact with it within the page. Now, there's two methods of doing the PDF. One is using the Adobe PDF Reader ActiveX, which gets installed on the person's desktop when they install Adobe Reader. Okay? And you may have experienced that behavior if you've gone to your bank and you've wanted to print off a statement. Automatically, the PDF file opens up in the browser, okay, and you can print from it. So you're using, in those instances, an ActiveX control. So we can use that method. Okay. We can also use Word Online. So if you're using Office 365, then you could actually display your PDF within Word Online. Okay. If you're on premises, if you've installed the Office Web Apps server, so you've got the Office, the Word Online, Excel Online on premises, then again you can display the contents of a PDF file using that capability. Now, it's much better to use the Word Online capability to use PDF than the ActiveX. ActiveX, I've found, is a bit slow. Okay? So again, see if there's many different ways of displaying your contents and working out which contents you should do. There's also a lot of times there's some caching capability. So like the Visio Services web part allows you to say, I'm going to cache it. So if somebody else comes to the page, they don't have to refresh it. You've got to be careful a little bit about security, so test it out yourself using a user ID other than you. Okay, but that may help with performance to do some caching. So I'm going to do the demos all in one go. So let's just talk about Excel. So again, because I'm limiting myself to not using Power BI, I'm really just concentrating on how we display pivot tables, pivot charts, and Power View within our SharePoint solution. Okay, so there's everything here is what we would create in Excel. So again, only the person who's the solution creator needs to have Excel, okay, and needs to have those skills. Okay. And so if they're used to that, then of course they can create them. So we've got an example of an ordinary table at the top. So where's the data? Is it going to be embedded in the Excel file, or are we going to get it from some other system? Now, there is a limitation with using these methods here of displaying the contents within an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so there's a file size restriction of 10 megabytes. If you're in Office 365, if you're in Office 365, it's 10 megabytes. I don't think that's the restriction on premises. But if you buy Power PI, then that size restriction doesn't go away, but it's a lot bigger. Okay, but we try not to buy it. So my workaround, that if you can't connect up to the external data source, okay, to embed the data, right? Well, you can only embed a small amount. Okay, if you can create a data connection and leave your data in the external data source, then your file's going to be small anyway. Okay, because it's the data that usually makes your files go over that. So once you've once you've got your data, you could create a chart. So we've got a pie chart there and a bar chart. And then we've got controls on those charts, and we'll be able to interact with those controls on our web page. Okay? So that's all very good. Okay? If you are using Power View, now Power View is an add-in. It doesn't come automatically with SharePoint 2013, but you can download it and add it in. That helps you decide where your data is and helps you manipulate your data, and it creates underneath the cover something called a data model. Okay, so again, there's some restrictions if you use that add-in. Okay, so I've listed them on the screen, so you can read that later. Okay. So here's the supported data sources. So SharePoint 2013, so in Excel, we've got a lot more data sources that we can actually access, okay, than the Visio equivalent, okay. So perhaps that may be the reason why you're going to choose Excel over Visio if you're in Office 365, okay. If you're on premises, well, they're both about the same, okay. If you are going to display your data, your Excel file, using Excel online, then again there's some restrictions about that. If you're going to use pivot table or whatever, and you're going to force the person to open the file using the Excel client application, then again you can connect up to data all over the place. So again, some ideas about what the solution creator has to take in mind. Okay. So if you're on premises and you're displaying the pie chart or the pivot table within your web page, then what you might want to do is you might say, right, I believe that the data in this external data source has changed. Okay. However, it's displaying the latest the data when the person created the spreadsheet. Okay. Now you can, on the web part, tell it to refresh itself every so often. But what the user might want to do is refresh it immediately they go to the page. Okay. And so, yes, if you're on premises, there's a lot more data sources that you can say, go to that external data source and get the latest data. But again, there's unsupported stuff there, and we talked about Power View and Power Query and about data models. Okay. There is some updates in Office 365 that, again, if you're going to visualize data, you may be interested in. Again, here's some URLs to it. And again, they've now said that this is a Power Map, So this is again a new feature that they've added to Office 365 that you might like to experiment with. And from May, and so you'll see May last year, they're saying that the Power Map capability is now available to a lot more people. Okay, so again, we're looking at free stuff available to us. Okay. And there's some case studies that you might like to see what you can actually develop. So always keep your eye open. If you're an Office 365 user, who's an Office 365 user? Okay. Always keep your eye open on the roadmap to see what's coming. Also, if they have just released something, then they usually do put a blog out about it. The Excel team seem to be very active, and again, there's loads of resources about how to use Excel. So let's go on with the demos. So I've got a few demos that I want to display to you here. So the first one is, how do we display the contents of files? Okay, so I haven't got the Enterprise Edition. I haven't got E4, E5. My data is within a file. So here you can see on the page, I'm embedding a PowerPoint. So I can click through the slides of the PowerPoint on my page. Right. Further down here, you can see I've embedded the a Visio diagram. I'm not using Visio Services here. What I'm using is the fact that the person who's displaying this page has either got Visio installed on their desktop, or they've got Visio Viewer installed on their desktop. Okay. Down here, I've got a PDF file. This is using the Adobe PDF Active Reader. Okay. And down here, I'm showing the contents of a Word file. Okay. Now, these ones here, the PowerPoint is using, we're getting it displayed because it's using PowerPoint Online, and down here we're getting it because it's using Word Online within the contents of the page. So let's see how I did this. So if I go to a page, well, let's have a look at the page here. Oh no, so go back to the page. Let's go back to documents. It's working on it. You always have to look at the tab, working on it. Let's try again. I don't know why that's not showing. Let's try it a different way. All I want to do is show the document library. Well, let's stop that. For example, if I wanted to display a file here, so the Word file, that's a Visio file. So you get the card come out, many people, I'm doing this on Office 365, okay, and so you do have a manage option up the top here, and the advantage of clicking the manage option is that you don't get a preview of the document. It's the preview of the document that sometimes takes a bit of time. But what's the nice thing about this is you do see the diagram here, okay, and you can get hold of the URL of the file. Now it is much better to get a Word document or a PowerPoint. So let's try and display. So if one of the recommendations I do is that if you are displaying the content on a page and you want the users of the site to go to the page to see the contents, right, is not to put the file within the documents library, because your users believe that they're collaborating about the documents in the shared documents library. So I always put files that I'm displaying the contents of within the site assets library. Okay, and then the solution creators maintain the files here so that they don't get muddled up with your files that your team's collaborating about. So that's why I've put the files here. Okay, so I've got a PowerPoint here, and when I click this open here, I've got this little down arrow. Now, on the preview of an Excel file, one of the options you don't get is the embedded information. Okay, and so you can see here I've got some HTML code that I want to get. Again, I don't have to understand it all. I need to just get hold of that. I can also do a share so that I can say who's going to have access to it. So the link within the embedded file, if it allows anybody to edit it and I only want people to read it, then I can substitute the URL in that embedded HTML with this URL, and that will restrict what the person can do with the file. So I'll go back to the site pages. I'll create a new page. Now the new button in Office 365, this is a wiki wiki library, and so the default will be to create a wiki page. Now, of course, in many cases, a wiki page is great. All right, it's very easy to edit and it's very easy to link to other pages. So that's the page that your users of your site will mostly use. You as a solution creator, especially if you're going to use web part connections, will want to create a web part page. Okay, you can't have web part connections on a wiki page. Okay, so don't click the new button because that creates you a wiki page. If you look on the Files tab, now this is new for SharePoint 2013, we've got a split button and we've got two content types displayed to us. The wiki page, which is the default, but we've now got the second content type of a web part page. So you as solution creators, if you're going to create web part connections, want to create a web part page. In SharePoint 2010, to create a web part page was a very convoluted process, okay, but it's a lot easier now. Okay, so I give it a name. Oh, I'm in the. Am I in the right place? No. Yes, I am. So why is it coming up with add document? It's behaving. It's not behaving itself, is it? I don't want to browse to add a document. Okay. So let me go to a different site. Okay. Just to show you that you can really create a web part page. So let's see if this one behaves properly. Right, that's the page you should have got, so I don't know why that other site was misbehaving. So you would have recognised this from many years ago, so that gives you all your web part zones and how your web parts behave in your web part zones. I usually choose, which one do I usually choose? I usually choose that page layout format, Unlike a wiki page that you can change the layout, okay, because underneath the covers it's using CSS and HTML divs, okay, so you don't have to recreate the page. Your web part page, it's been around for years, it's table orientated, and therefore you can't change the layout of your web part zones. If you do want a different layout, then you would have to create another page and then recreate all the stuff on your page. So I always chose a web part page that's got many different combinations. If you don't put a web part in a web part zone, when you save the page, the web part zone just doesn't display. But at least here I can have 4 columns, I can have 3 columns, I can have a header, I can have a footer, and so on. I can have many different combinations of layout of a page. And the also thing to be aware of, even though I said I want to create a web part page in the site pages document library, that wasn't the default. So often have I clicked OK and I can't find the page because it's been created in the wrong document library. Again, always try to create your pages in the site pages, because as I say, the most recent, page type that your users are going to create are wiki pages, and there's a very easy way of linking one page to the other, okay, with the square bracket nomenclature. So again, they can link to your pages that you've created as long as you save it in the site pages document library. Okay, and then we can add our web parts. Okay, so let me go to back to the other site, because my files are over here. Okay, so let's show you the contents. That's the embedded Excel. So let's see the embedded. So you put your web part page or your wiki page into edit mode. The next thing you want to do is click the Insert tab and click Embedded Code. What this is doing underneath the covers is adding a script, the script web part to your page. Okay, but you don't need to know that. Okay, then you paste in your embedded code. Oops. Go back to my site assets page, get my embedded code again. Paste it in. It already gives you a preview of what it's looking like, okay? And then you click Insert. Okay. And that's how you get this here. Okay. The same sort of thing for this is a PDF. Again, first of all, let's do the Visio diagram. Now, unfortunately, there is not a Visio online. Okay. So the trick with a Visio diagram, so you can see all the web parts here. Is you have to type in this. Now, there's a file on the Microsoft website that tells you all about exactly what to do, and you can copy this HTML, and then all you need to do down here is substitute. So you see the HTTPS, so you just substitute your site, your document library, and your URL to your image there. And as I say, as long as you've got Visio, the person's got Visio installed or Visio Viewer, then it will display. If they haven't, so the magic bit that tells the person's computer what program to use to display the file is this class ID. So that's the class ID for Visio. So if I delete that, right, what would appear on the page? So if they haven't got Visio installed or they haven't got Visio Viewer, then they actually see that comment. So I've put that within the HTML that says, bad luck, you can't see it, but if you install this free bit of software, then you will be able to see the Visio diagram. For the PDF, now this is using the ActiveX, so you can see that it gets that loading command. Very simple. Again, it's an object tab, okay, and again you can play around with the height and the width if it's not big enough on your page. I've got this 1024 by 768 so that you can see it, but it depends on your screen sizes at work. So the magic again to tell the browser what program or what ActiveX control to use to display the file is the type bit. So that says application/PDF, and again all you need to do is paste in the URL of your file from your document library and it will display on your page. And if it's a big file, you know, just like any other PDF, you'll have the paging capability so people can go backwards and forwards and they can download it and so on. So if you actually create many of your brochures, right, as PDFs, and people keep on complaining that they have to open them to actually have a look at them, then you could have them on pages. And this is the Word one. Oh no, this is the Word one that we're seeing here. So again, you would open it up in Word, you'd do a preview, and just like when I did a preview of the PDF, there will be an option in the drop down that says embed code. You just copy it and you paste it into this script web part. Now the trick with Excel, because when you do a preview of the Excel, is there isn't a drop down that says embedded code. Okay, so what you do is you get the embedded code for a Word document, all right, and you substitute the URL for your Excel spreadsheet, okay, and away you go, okay, because then it works out what to use, because this WOPI frame, Windows, I can't remember what it stands for, but that is the Office Apps Server. So that is your Word online server, your Excel online server, okay? So that goes and says, because you have to register with SharePoint, which server is being used to render your Word, your Excel, your PowerPoint online. This is all done for you with Office 365, but if you've implemented your Office app server, then your IT pros have to do a PowerShell command that says, please use this WOPI server. They call it a WOPI server, okay, because everything's known by a different name. And so that's saying, please, SharePoint, go to the WOPI server, the server that's running Office web apps, and please display this file. And of course, Excel Online will be able to be displayed by that server. So that's what that all means there. But you don't have to worry about that. Just click the preview, click embedded code, click open your page in edit mode, do insert embedded code, paste it in. If it's an Excel one, just substitute your Excel URL in. Okay. So here is exactly what I did, and so I can now see the contents of an Excel spreadsheet. Now the Excel spreadsheet that I'm using here has been configured to be a mortgage calculator. Okay, so I'm displaying in using the Excel online, a little table from the Excel file, and I've exposed certain of the fields, so I've named certain of the fields, and I've said, right, when this file is in browse view, please allow the users to interact with these particular fields, so that I've configured them as parameters, and I will show you how I've done that. So this means that using Excel, I can say I want a loan of 500,000, and I'm going to get a 2% rate, a mortgage rate, and I'm going to take it over 25 years, and I'm going to click apply, and over there the table has automatically changed. Okay, so I can interact with the contents of my Excel file, right, even on the page. I can also swap to a different tab, and on this tab I may have a pie chart. Okay, so I can actually see that pie chart. You can change that HTML embedded code to display certain things, but again, that's getting a bit codified. Okay, so that's one way of exposing your Excel spreadsheet. So another way, which I've already created, is to use the Excel web part. Okay, so this needs Excel services. So what I did, I was put the page into edit mode. I clicked insert, web part, and the web parts you're looking for when we're talking about Excel are underneath the business data category. So we've got Excel Web Access, and we've got the Visio Web Access. So they're the two web parts if you've got the Enterprise Edition. Now these are a little bit easier to configure. You don't have to get any embedded code or whatever. So let's just cancel that. So now, if we have a look at how I've configured this one. So I've pointed it to the file that I want to display. So if we go along, see, it's actually pointing to an Excel spreadsheet there. I'm telling it I don't want you to display the whole file, right? I have named perhaps a pivot table, perhaps I've named the pivot chart. So I'm saying for this, I just want you to display that pivot chart. Now this is much more effective when you're building your dashboards. Okay? And again, using the power of Excel, you know, your world's your oyster as to how you can visualize the data here. Okay. So I'm going to the women's in technology thing. If we have a look at this one here, again, you've got certain options. So you can actually say, please display all pivot charts, all pivot tables. You can do sorting, you can do filtering, you can say whether you want to display that particular toolbar so that a person can actually flip from one named object to another name object, or switch, I should say, not flipped. So they can do that. So that page looks a little bit better than using Excel Online. As I say, you can do it by playing around with the embedded. And again, we can have the same sort of behavior here. I want to borrow, 25,000 with a rate of 3 over 10 years, and I want to apply, and it changes the table there. Okay. So yes, and I can flip down and say I want to see that particular table or that particular named object. So that's so let's or whatever. Okay. So you don't have to build loads and loads of pages. You just have to teach your users, oh, use this, and then you can see it as a bar chart. You can see it as a pie chart or whatever. I've also got an example here. Now, if you were in my session yesterday, you know that I created an Access web app that was looking after tracking assets in a particular company. And I exposed it as an external content type, and I created an external list that went to that SQL database, and you could see the contents that people were actually importing into the Access web app. So this data is not stored within SharePoint, it's actually in an SQL database. Okay, and it's in an Azure SQL database. So I've defined the external content type or whatever. So what I've done here is I've got another Excel spreadsheet that's saying please go to that SQL database. Please use the secure store target application for the user ID and password, and please draw a pivot table of that information. Okay, so if I just open it up as a different figure here. So here is my external list, and we'll see in a minute that at the moment I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 assets that I'm actually tracking. Okay, so you can see down there I've got 8 things. Whereas if I go back here and I look at my Excel spreadsheet here, so again I can flip between a pie chart and the pivot table, so I haven't really configured it as neatly as I did the previous example. But you can see I've only got 6 items. Well, that's because when I created the Excel spreadsheet, there was only 6 items in that external data source. And I have not updated my Excel spreadsheet to go and get a new refresh of that data. Now, the person who's seeing this on the page doesn't need to open up the Excel spreadsheet. What they can do here is they can say refresh all connections, let's say that. Again, whenever you're getting data from somewhere else, Microsoft always says, are you sure? Okay. So this is Excel Services going away, and look, I've now got 8 items. I have not affected the contents of the Excel spreadsheet. All I've done is affected how that Excel spreadsheet is displaying. Okay. So really you need to update the Excel spreadsheet so that people get the most up-to-date thing. So you need to configure that to happen. Let's have a look at some Visio. So on this site, let me go back up to the Visio site. All I've done here is use the promoted links list. Have any of you used the promoted links list? Right, it's like a links list on Android. It's wonderful. Okay, so all you need to do is say, here's where the image is. This is the URL I want you to go to when you click on the image. Here is the because when you hover over it, you can get extra text to appear. So this is almost like a quick way of creating buttons that people can click on and then be directed to somewhere else. So here I'm saying, right, if you want to find information about the retail solution, then click that. That takes you to a page. I've automatically got it to go to a page where I've put the Visio Access page on. So this is using Visio Services. This is quite a complicated scenario, which hopefully will come up in a moment. So we'll see the Visio diagram, and this uses some of this JavaScript so that when somebody clicks an object in the Visio diagram, it will send some content to this Excel web access web part, and this Excel web part will then use the contents to filter on. Okay, so that should be coming in a minute.
Is there a good online source to start with to get that JavaScript?
Yes, yeah. Again, if you look, so as I click on each of these, you can see this content here changes. Right? Right? If we go to Visio, again using webpack connections, you could list all the Visio files in your document library, and then you can connect it to the Visio webpack, and as you click on each of your Visio files, it will display the contents of it. And I've forgotten where I've put it now. I did have one created, but I can't remember where I've put it. We have run out of time, so I'm sorry about that. But there's loads of different scenarios that you can actually use to actually make use of it. So go to channel 9 and put in like Excel and put in Visio. So last year's Tech Ed, the SharePoint conference 18 months ago, all have good examples of how to build Visio scenarios. There's some blogs about it. There's some Visio MVPs who also blog about it as well, okay, as well as Excel. So hopefully I've encouraging you to use Visio and Excel and some of this free stuff that's available to you. Okay. Thank you very much.